Red Frequency TV. Good evening. You found Red Frequency TV. The signal is weak, but somehow you always find us. Every transmission you hear comes from someone who experienced something they still can't explain. Some disappear, some refuse to speak about what happened, and some are still waiting for the broadcast to end. Tonight's transmission is titled The Last Broadcast. Turn your volume up, keep the lights on, and if your television turns on by itself while you're listening, do not change the channel. And remember, do not watch alone. I never used to think much about falling asleep with the TV on. It was just background noise, something to fill the silence while I drifted off. Most nights, I'd wake up to an old movie or one of those late-night infomercials nobody actually watches. But one night, I woke up to something different. The room felt colder, not freezing, just cold enough that I noticed the television was already on. I don't remember turning it on before I went to bed. I figured maybe I'd forgotten. Half asleep, I reached for the remote. That's when I realized I couldn't hear a single word coming from the TV. No movie, no commercial, no music, just a faint crackling sound, like someone was trying to speak. Through a wall of static, I squinted at the screen. The picture kept flickering, black, white, black, white, like it was trying to tune into something. Then, for less than a second, I could have sworn someone was standing on the screen, staring directly at me. And then it was gone. I blinked. The figure was gone. The screen was nothing but static again. I rubbed my eyes. I was still half asleep. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I picked up the remote. My thumb hovered over the power button. Before I could press it, the static stopped. Not all at once. It faded, slowly, like someone had turned the volume down on a storm. The screen went completely black. I could see my own reflection, the room behind me, the edge of my bed. Everything looked normal. Then, my reflection smiled. I didn't. I froze. A second later, the screen flickered. My reflection was normal again. I stumbled backward and dropped the remote onto the floor. It hit the hardwood with a loud crack. The batteries rolled under the bed. The television stayed black, silent, almost like it was waiting for me to pick the remote back up. I told myself I was leaving. I took one step toward my bedroom door. Then I heard it, a soft, mechanical click, the kind an old television makes, right before the picture comes back. I turned around. The black screen slowly faded. The static was gone. A dimly lit room came into focus. Wood-paneled walls, an old wooden desk, a microphone, a single lamp hanging from the ceiling. Sitting behind the desk was a man in a dark suit. His hands were folded neatly in front of him. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring down at a stack of papers. For several long seconds, he said nothing. He simply turned one page, then another. Finally, he looked up. His eyes met the camera. Not angry, not happy, just empty. He gave a polite smile, the kind a late-night news anchor would give before reading the headlines. Then he leaned toward the microphone, and in a calm, steady voice, he said, "Good evening." The room went completely still. Even the buzzing from the television had disappeared. The man adjusted the microphone, straightened the papers on his desk, then looked directly into the camera, not through it, into it, as if he knew someone was watching. He smiled politely. "Good evening." If you're seeing this broadcast, he paused, just long enough to make the silence unbearable. It means the signal found you. I frowned. The signal? I reached for the volume. Before I could touch the button, he spoke again. Please don't adjust your television. My hand froze. I hadn't said a word. I hadn't made a sound. But somehow, he knew exactly what I was about to do. He glanced down at the papers on his desk, turned a single page, then looked back into the camera. This time, his smile was gone. We've been expecting you. I told myself he couldn't see me. It was just an old recording. It had to be. People on television don't look back at you. They just look at the camera. So I took one slow step away from the screen. The broadcaster stopped talking. He listened, almost like he'd heard something. His eyes drifted away from the camera. They followed me. One step, then another. My stomach tightened. No, that wasn't possible. I moved to the other side of my room. His eyes moved with me, slowly, deliberately, never blinking. He smiled again, not because he was happy, because he knew I'd finally noticed. Then, for the first time since the broadcast began, he spoke without looking at the camera. He looked directly at me and quietly said, "Please, come a little closer." Every part of me wanted to leave, to walk out of the room and never look back, but I couldn't. There was something about that voice, calm, patient, like it already knew I'd stay. I took one step toward the television, then another. The closer I got, the clearer the picture became. The broadcaster's suit wasn't black. It was dark blue. The desk was covered in tiny scratches. The microphone looked older than I was. Details I couldn't see before were suddenly impossible to ignore. Then I noticed something else. One of the papers on his desk, the writing was blurry, but there was one line I could read. Across the top of the page, in faded black letters, it said, "Next viewer." The broadcaster slowly placed one hand over the paper, covering the words. He looked into the camera, smiled, and softly said, "You're closer than the last one." I backed away from the television. Slowly, my pulse was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. The broadcaster didn't follow me with his eyes this time. He simply looked down at the papers on his desk. He flipped one page, then another. Each page made a dry, brittle sound, like they were decades old. Finally, he stopped. His finger rested on a single page. He frowned. For the first time, he looked confused. Then, he glanced back at the camera. "That's strange." He paused. His voice was quieter now. "This isn't where your story was supposed to go." A chill ran through me. He reached for a pen, crossed something out on the page, wrote a few new words. The moment the pen left the paper, the light in my bedroom flickered. Once, twice, then every clock in the room stopped at the exact same second. The broadcaster capped the pen, looked directly into me, and with the faintest smile, said, "That's better." I stared at the clocks, every one of them, frozen. The second hand never moved. The room felt unnaturally still. No humming from the refrigerator, no cars outside, not even the wind. It was as if the entire world had paused. Only the television was alive. The broadcaster glanced off camera, almost like someone had spoken to him. He gave a small nod, then reached beneath his desk. When his hand came back into view, he was holding an old videotape. Its label had faded with age. Only a few words were still readable. The last broadcast. He brushed the dust off the tape, held it up to the camera, then looked straight at me. "Every broadcast," he said quietly, "has a recording. He turned the tape over. My stomach dropped. Written across the back, in handwriting that looked hurried, were 3 words: "Do not rewind." The broadcaster rested the tape on the desk. Without breaking eye contact, he slowly reached towards something just out of frame. A VCR clicked. The tape disappeared into the machine. He pressed one button. Rewind. The tape began to rewind. It wasn't loud, just the slow, mechanical whir of old gears turning backward. The broadcaster never touched another button. He simply watched. The television flickered. The image distorted. For a moment, the newsroom disappeared. Something else flashed across the screen. A living room, then another. A bedroom, another bedroom, another. Each image lasted less than a second. Different homes, different televisions, different people, all staring at the exact same broadcast. The tape kept rewinding. The images started moving faster. Dozens, hundreds, maybe more. Every face looked the same, not because they were identical, but because every one of them wore the exact same expression. Confusion, followed by fear. Then they were gone. The newsroom returned. The broadcaster lowered his eyes, almost sadly. He placed a hand on the rewinding tape, closed his eyes, and quietly whispered. I remember every single one of them. The room fell silent. Even the tape had stopped rewinding. The broadcaster kept his hand resting on it. His head was lowered. For the first time, he looked tired, not frightened, not angry, just exhausted after a long silence. He finally looked up. His eyes met mine again. There was no smile this time, only regret. He took a slow breath, then quietly said, "You think I'm the one keeping you here?" He glanced around the empty newsroom, the faded walls, the old lights, the shelves lined with dusty tapes. Then he shook his head. "I was sitting where you are. A very long time ago. I couldn't move." He reached for one final folder lying at the edge of the desk. It was older than the others. The corners were torn. The paper had turned yellow with age. He slowly opened it, looked inside, and his expression changed. He stared at the page, then looked directly into the camera. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "No, this can't be right." He slowly turned the folder toward the camera. Inside, there wasn't a photograph. There wasn't a name. There wasn't a report. There was only one sentence. The next broadcaster. I couldn't look away from the folder. The next broadcaster. The words didn't make sense. They shouldn't have. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was the only thing keeping me from panicking. This isn't real. I said it out loud. The broadcaster closed the folder very carefully. Then he looked at me. For the first time, his voice sounded almost human. I said the exact same thing. The room fell silent again. Then I heard a faint click behind me. I turned. The television was still there, but something else wasn't. My bedroom door, it had disappeared. Nothing but a blank wall. I stumbled backward. The window, gone. The closet, gone. One by one, everything that connected my room to the outside world simply ceased to exist. Only two things remained, me and the television. The broadcaster lowered his eyes, as though he already knew what came next. Then, without looking back up, he whispered, "The signal has locked on." I rushed to the wall where my bedroom door had been. I slammed my hands against it, solid, cold, like it had always been there. "No," I whispered. "This isn't possible." I spun toward the window. Only more wall. No glass, no curtains, no moonlight. It was as if my room had forgotten it was ever connected to the rest of the house. The television crackled. I looked back. The broadcaster hadn't moved. He simply watched me. not with satisfaction, with pity. He reached beneath his desk and slowly pulled out an old brass key. It looked ancient. Its teeth were worn smooth, as if countless hands had used it before. He held it up, turning it just enough for the light to catch it. Then he asked, the first question he'd asked all night, "When this door appears?" He paused. His eyes never left mine. Will you have the courage to open it?" The television let out one long burst of static. Then, somewhere behind me, I heard a doorknob slowly begin to turn. The last broadcast, part 13. The doorknob turned, slowly, deliberately. It never reached the end. It just kept turning over and over with the same dull metallic click. I couldn't breathe. There wasn't supposed to be a door anymore. I forced myself to look. The wall where my bedroom door had disappeared was changing. A thin crack split down the middle, then another. The wallpaper peeled back by itself, as if something underneath was trying to get out. The cracks spread wider. Wood, old splintered wood. A doorway was rebuilding itself, piece by piece. Nails groaned, hinges creaked, dust drifted onto the floor. Within seconds, a weathered wooden door stood where the wall had been. It looked older than the house itself. The brass knob stopped turning. Silence on the television. The broadcaster slowly stood for the first time. He picked up the old brass key, held it toward the camera, then quietly said, "Whatever opens that door." He swallowed. "It isn't coming in." A long pause. Then he lowered his voice. "It's waiting for you to come through." I couldn't stop staring at the door. Every instinct told me not to touch it, but another feeling, quieter, deeper, kept pulling me toward it, like I'd forgotten something important. And whatever was on the other side remembered. I took one slow step forward. The floor creaked beneath my feet. The broadcaster watched in silence. He didn't encourage me. He didn't try to stop me. He just looked. Ashamed, I reached the door. The wood felt ice cold beneath my fingertips. The brass knob hadn't moved. The room hadn't made a sound. Then I noticed something carved into the frame. Not a name, not a warning, just a list. Hundreds of tiny scratches, perfectly straight, one beneath another, like someone had been counting. I leaned closer. The final mark wasn't finished. It ended halfway down, fresh, as if whoever carved it had been interrupted. Behind me, the broadcaster spoke one last time, barely above a whisper. "Don't finish the count." My hand hovered over the doorknob just before I touched it. The broadcaster spoke. Wait. His voice was different, not commanding, almost desperate. He reached for one final folder resting beneath the others. Unlike the rest, this one was sealed. He broke the seal with trembling hands for the first time all night. He looked afraid. He opened the folder. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. His face went pale. Very slowly, he looked up at the camera. Then he quietly said, "I was hoping this wasn't yours." My chest tightened. He swallowed hard, then began to read. Name. He spoke it, every letter, perfectly. My blood ran cold. He turned the page. Current address. He read that too. Exactly. Not one word was wrong. I had never told anyone. No cameras, no microphones. No reason this broadcast should know where I lived. The broadcaster closed the folder. His hand wouldn't stop shaking. Then he looked straight into the camera and whispered, "I'm sorry. You're the final viewer." The words echoed through my head. "You're the final viewer." The room was silent. The old wooden door stood in front of me. The television glowed behind me. For the first time all night, I realized something. The broadcaster wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the door. He slowly stood from behind the desk. His shoulders were heavy, like he'd been carrying the same burden for years. Then, quietly, he laid the brass key on his desk. He looked into the camera one last time, not with fear, not with anger, with relief. Every broadcast, he whispered, has to end. He reached forward and switched off the studio lights. The newsroom disappeared into darkness. The television went black. At the exact same moment, the old wooden door behind me creaked open. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. A cold breath touched the back of my neck. Then, a voice I'd never heard before spoke from the darkness, calm, patient, almost welcoming. Good evening. The television clicked back on by itself. The screen lit up. The newsroom was exactly the same. The same desk, the same microphone, the same stack of folders, but the chair wasn't empty. Someone was sitting behind it. The camera slowly focused. The figure looked directly into the lens, then smiled, and the broadcast began again. He slowly stood from behind the desk. His shoulders were heavy, like he'd been carrying the same burden for years. Then he turned toward the camera. For a brief moment, there was relief in his eyes, as if he'd finally reached the end of something. Then he smiled, not a normal smile. The biggest, most unnatural, heart-wrenching, blood-curdling smile I'd ever seen. It stretched impossibly wide across his face. It didn't belong on a human being. His eyes never blinked, never moved. He leaned toward the microphone, and in a calm, almost cheerful voice, he whispered, "You know, a long pause. Every broadcast has to end." His smile widened even further. "And this is the last." You've reached the end of tonight's broadcast. Whether you believe what you just heard is entirely up to you. But if your television turns on by itself tonight, don't assume it's a coincidence. Some broadcasts don't end when the screen goes black. They just wait for someone else to tune in until next transmission. This is Red Frequency TV, signing off. End of transmission.